Hello, my name is Sam and welcome to Quick Play. This is where I take the daily Tiny Glade pre-builds and try and create a nice looking scene with a 1 hour time frame. Then I cut it down, add some fast forward, and share a few tidbits related to the build. In today's video, I'm going to build a dungeon based on the following Tiny Glade prompt. Before I get into it, I do want to preface this video and let you all know that in this video I talk about some harsh subject matter revolving around dungeons. Okay, so back to the video. Now, I have very abruptly come to the conclusion that I need to probably do my research before I begin my builds because I thought a dungeon and a prison were interchangeable. But it turns out that a dungeon and a prison have one very defining difference, and that is that a dungeon is underground. The word dungeon comes from the Old French donjon, meaning a fortified tower in a castle or a keep. However, the word became associated with dark underground prisons, leading to the modern idea of dungeons. And so, as you can see, my build is clearly above ground, so not really a dungeon. I will gladly take ownership in my lack of research. However, I'm going to tell you why I think this build could still work a little later on. First, I want to share some tidbits about dungeons. Dungeons have a long and fascinating history, evolving from real-life medieval prisons to a staple of fantasy fiction, video games, and board games. In medieval Europe, dungeons were often located in the deepest parts of the castles. Many were dark, damp, and filled with ample objects to torture prisoners, deserving or otherwise. They were used, and are still used, for psychological and physical suffering. Some dungeons in medieval castles had false doors and dead-end corridors to confuse potential escapees, and as mentioned before, are typically located underground. The oubliette, which comes from the French word oublier, which means to forget, was a particularly cruel form of dungeon. They were deep pits where prisoners were thrown into and often, oublier. Oubliette typically had no doors, only a hatch at the top, making the escape nearly impossible. Some famous dungeons are the Tower of London, located in England, used as a prison for centuries, housing famous captives like Anne Boleyn and Guy Fawkes. Anne Boleyn was the second wife of King Henry VIII and the mother of Queen Elizabeth, who became one of England's greatest monarchs. Guy Fawkes was an English Catholic who tried to blow up the House of Parliament in 1605. His failed attempt is why Britain celebrates Guy Fawkes Night, a bonfire night on November 5th. Château d'If in France, popularized due to the Count of Monte Cristo, is an island fortress that housed political prisoners. Originally built as a fortress, it was turned into a prison in the 16th century. One of its most famous prisoners was known as the Man in the Iron Mask, who was held there during the reign of the French king Louis XIV. It was rumored that this mysterious man was the king's twin brother, and he was forced to remain there to prevent a power struggle for the throne. Another fictional character, Edmond Dantes, from the Count of Monte Cristo, was also imprisoned here before escaping. Now a museum and tourist attraction, the Château d'If is famous for its literary connection. Visitors can explore the dark cells and fortress walls with breathtaking views. Edinburgh Castle, located in Scotland, was built in the 11th century and was a residence, military stronghold, and prison for centuries. One of Scotland's most besieged castles, attacked over 26 times, it became a military barracks and prison for war captives in the 18th and 19th centuries, holding French, Spanish, and even American soldiers during the American Revolution. While not imprisoned in a dungeon, 16-year-old William Douglas, the 6th Earl of Douglas, and his younger brother were invited to a royal feast at the castle and accused of treason. A fake trial was held, and after a black bull's head, a symbol of death, was placed on the table, they were beheaded in the castle courtyard. Apparently this event inspired the Red Wedding in the Game of Thrones. The castle did notably imprison Mary, Queen of Scots, Scotland's most famous queen. She was held at the castle after being forced to give up her throne. She was imprisoned for a short time and then escaped to England, which did not turn out in her favor. Today, Edinburgh Castle is one of Scotland's most popular tourist attractions. It features reenactments, ghost tours, and the Stone of Destiny, a symbol of Scottish monarchy. The Bastille, France, was built in 1370 as a fortress to protect Paris from English attacks. The fortress turned prison became a symbol of tyranny used by French kings to hold political enemies and noble prisoners. The Marquis de Sade was a writer imprisoned for his obscene works. He wrote controversial, erotic literature, violent themes, and had extreme philosophies. He was arrested multiple times for his sexual deviance, blasphemy, and violent behavior. Apparently his name even inspired the word sadism. The Marquis spent 32 years in prison, was deemed psychologically insane, and died in 1814, largely forgotten until his works were rediscovered in the 20th century. On the other spectrum, we have Voltaire, a famous philosopher. He was arrested and sent to Bastille in 1717 for mocking the French monarchy. He opposed censorship, religious intolerance, and absolute monarchy. He advocated for free speech and rational thinking. His idea influenced the French Revolution and modern democracy. And finally, guess who also apparently inhabited Bastille? The mysterious man in the iron mask. On July 14, 1789, revolutionaries stormed Bastille, symbolizing the start of the French Revolution. The prison was torn down, and its stones were used to build bridges and homes. Bastille Day, celebrated on July 14th, is France's national holiday. Dungeons have become a major trope in fantasy literature, symbolizing danger, mystery, and hidden treasure. Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th centuries often feature dungeons as places of horror and confinement. Whether on a board, paper, or screen, dungeons have been a prominent component in a lot of mythological and fantasy tales. Lord of the Rings, Dante's Inferno, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Game of Thrones, The Labyrinth of the Minotaur in Greek mythology, Chronicles of Narnia, and Indiana Jones all feature a dungeon or two. You could even argue that the Upside Down in Stranger Things is an alternate worldly dungeon. And the board games like Dungeons and Dragons, and video games like Legend of Zelda, Diablo, and Dark Souls popularized dungeon as a challenge-filled environment. So there you have it. There are some tidbits on dungeons. As you can see, this build is clearly a prison, but I'm going to take some liberties to explain why this could potentially be a dungeon. It's simple, really. See those grates along the walls? Well, I'm thinking they're the top of a massive pit. So the guards just drop prisoners down to some unknown depths, and those grates offer the only light to the prisoners down below. It's an oubliette, the worst dungeon of all, which is brutal contrast to the cozy atmosphere of Tiny Glades. But hey, they decided on that prompt. So I hope you enjoyed this build and learning about dungeons. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!